Are you ready for the single most important event in European history of the 8th century? A truly epic event. The rumble of Ramen, the tussle in Tours, the pugilism in Poitiers, the melee of Martel, the frenzy in France. In the right corner, sporting an epic mustache and goatee, leading the forces of the Umayyad Caliphate, Abdul Rahman al-Ghafiqi. And in the left corner, wearing a crowned helmet, leading Frankish and Burgundian forces, Charles the Hammer Martel. It's the fight of the 8th century. Let's get ready to rumble! Okay, yeah, that's a little over the top, but trust me, this event is important enough to justify the hype. During this lecture, we're going to look at what I feel is one of the most important events in history. Hey, look who's here! Come on in, ladies! Michaela and Kaylin. Michaela, what do you think is one of the most important events in history? The Holocaust. And Kaylin, how about you?
My life.
What a very Kaylin answer. Well, thank you, ladies, for coming in today. We're going to look, though, at what I feel is the most important events in history. So if you aren't taking notes, you really need to pause the video, take some paper out. There are going to be a number of places, names, things you should really know, and it's a little hard to keep track of. But don't worry, it's not as complex as, say, Game of Thrones. Names to know in today's lecture. Odo the Great, Duke of Aquitaine. Charles the Hammer Martel, leader of the Frankish forces. The Umayyad Caliphate. These are the Islamic armies that had entered into Europe through Spain. Al-Sam ibn Malik al-Kalani, one of 3 Muslim generals in today's lecture. Uthman ibn Naisa, a rebel Muslim lord, and Abdul Rahman al-Ghafiqi, one of this lecture's main 2 figures. So before we go any further, let's set the stage. Rome, the western half, fell a good 300 years before this point. You've already learned about the Dark Ages. You know that while Europe may have been a little bit behind, the rest of the world was certainly not in the dark. However, with the collapse of Rome, there was no longer a central authority or power that was maintaining a unified structure in Europe. Without one controlling power, Europe devolved into a collection of small principalities. The exception to this were the Franks, who after the fall of Rome grew into the largest power in Western Europe. When the Muslim forces conquered Spain and crossed into France, the Franks controlled large areas of modern-day France, a good part of Western Germany, along with the Low Countries, Belgium, Holland, and Luxembourg. The Franks were starting to develop into an almost imperial power, and the only real thorn in their side prior to the Umayyad Caliphate were the forces of Aquitaine, led by a man known as Odo the Great. Hey, if your first name's got to be Odo, at least they call you the Great. Odo was the Duke of Aquitaine, a region in the south of what is today France. Odo had fought with Charles Martel before, but had lost, surrendering one of his allies and treasure to Martel. When the Islamic forces came against Odo, he rallied his own troops to fight them. His forces met those of the Umayyad Caliphate at the Battle of Toulouse. The Umayyad forces were led by Al-Sam ibn Malik al-Kalani. The Umayyad forces lost thousands of soldiers in their defeat. Upon hearing of the victory, the Pope declared Odo a champion of Christianity and sent him many gifts. To solidify peace in the region, Odo married his daughter to a rebel Muslim lord named Uthman ibn Naisa. Uthman became the governor of the Catalonia region of modern-day Spain, near Aquitaine. In 731, Charles Martel turned his attention to Aquitaine, seeking to add the area to the area controlled by the Franks. Martel spoke out against the allegiance between Odo and Uthman, and used that to justify his invasion, as Odo was Christian and Uthman was Muslim. Martel's forces ranged throughout Aquitaine and took control of the city of Bourges. Odo's forces fought against the Franks, but were defeated. After winning the battle, Martel returned to the Frankish lands. At the same time, Umayyad forces came through Spain and were rising against the forces under Uthman. The Umayyad forces were led by Abdul Rahman al-Ghafiqi. Uthman, knowing his own troops couldn't win the battle, called upon Odo, his father-in-law, for help. But as Odo and his men were currently fighting Charles Martel, they couldn't help Uthman. In the end, Uthman's forces are defeated and he is killed. Odo's daughter is captured and sent to Damascus as a prisoner. And that's still a better love story than Twilight. With the defeat of Uthman's forces, Abdul Rahman was able to move north and cross into Aquitaine. Odo mobilized the troops he had remaining and fought the Umayyad forces near the city of Bordeaux, but was defeated. Odo, realizing defeat, gathered his remaining forces and traveled north towards the Franks in an effort to alert Charles Martel of the coming invasion. Martel listened to Odo and agreed to join his Frankish forces with the Aquitanian troops, but only on one condition: that the Franks were the ones in charge and Odo was under the leadership of Martel. Odo agreed to this, knowing his own forces couldn't possibly stop the Umayyad ones. Charles then rallied his own men, and the two former enemies go forth together to engage the Muslim forces of Abdul Rahman al-Ghafiqi. The Umayyad forces didn't appear to be aware of the size or power of the Frankish forces under Martel. The combined Frankish and Aquitanian forces assembled on a hill between the towns of Poitiers and Tours. The Frankish forces were almost entirely infantry compared to the mixed infantry and cavalry of the Umayyad forces. The Frankish forces used the landscaping along with the phalanx strategy. The phalanx is an old technique where the units form into a large square with shields and spears facing out. This makes it difficult for the mounted forces to break through, limiting their value. For almost a week, the two forces fought small skirmishes, neither side being eager to engage the enemy fully. Martel didn't want to leave his defensible higher ground, and al-Ghafiqi was unsure of the size and composition of the Frankish army. The delay in battle was beneficial for both sides. The Umayyad forces, who'd been ranging across the countryside, were recalled to help in the fight. Meanwhile, Martel's infantry, who hadn't been part of the initial gathering, had time to arrive. The Frankish forces, though, were mainly comprised of two groups. One, a poorly trained and inexperienced militia, and the much more well-trained and better equipped battle-hardened infantry. The Umayyad forces had been battle-trained during their invasion of Spain and Aquitaine. The weather in October in France is believed to have been a key factor in the battle. The Umayyad forces weren't prepared for the cold weather coming in, and after a week of small skirmishes, Abdul Rahman al-Ghafiqi ordered his men to charge. The Umayyad military were forced to charge uphill to engage the Franks. The Franks continued to use the cover of the trees on the hillside, along with the phalanx, to break the cavalry attack and lessen the impact on their own forces. The Muslim cavalry forces repeatedly smashed into the Frankish lines, occasionally breaking through. At one point, the Muslim forces broke through the line and rushed for Charles in an attempt to kill the leader of the Frankish forces. His own men surrounded him and fought off the attackers. Later that day, Martel sent some men down the hill around kind of the back in an effort to go into the Umayyad camp, free any slaves they could find, burn things, destroy, loot, and plunder. When the Umayyad cavalry heard that their camp was under attack, they turned and left the battlefield, going back to defend their camp. When the Umayyad infantry saw the cavalry leave the battlefield, they assumed a call for retreat had sounded, and they too left the field, essentially causing an unorganized retreat to occur. The Franks held the line on the hill among the trees, following the years of training under Martel to never break ranks. The next morning, the Franks held the hill, waiting for an assault they knew would arrive, but didn't. As hours passed without an attack, Martel sent scouts down the hill into the Umayyad camp. Instead of tens of thousands of Umayyad soldiers, they found the camp abandoned. The Umayyad forces had left the night before in such a rush that anything that wasn't able to be easily carried was left behind. This included their tents. In the years that followed, the Frankish forces continued to chase the Umayyad forces from France and Aquitaine. Wow, that was a lot of material today. Tomorrow, we'll look at why this event was crucial in history. So remember, be proud of who you are, and I'll see you in class.